Okay, hello and welcome back to the St. Paul and Stylometrics lecture series. This is episode 4, Stylometric Influence on the Pauline Authorship Debate. Episode 1, we went over what stylometrics was, which is the measurement of style, writing style, in our case. Episode 2, we discussed the application of stylometrics to the Federalist Papers done by Mosteller and Wallace, where they looked at discriminating words from Hamilton and Madison to determine who was more likely to have written certain letters. In episode 3, we discussed how the Pauline corpus, the letters supposedly written by Paul, are called into question by modern scholars. Most modern scholars do not think that Paul wrote all 13 or 14 letters that are attributed to him. So in episode 4, we're going to go over how exactly does the measurement of style come into the Pauline corpus question. So this is a quote from Benjamin White in his 2025 book, Counting Paul. And he says, "Quantification and a sense of objectivity rooted in the physics envy of 19th century German historiography still lie then at the foundation of our discipline." So his point here is that when we talk about the measurement of style, we are talking about math and measuring numbers, and this quantification, because mathematics is not subjective in the sense of its results, 2 plus 2 equals 4, because that is objective and not subjective, it gives an air of objectivity to the conclusions that are drawn from the mathematical statements. Now, if I just said 2 plus 2 equals 4, that is strictly true, but it doesn't tell you anything about what the numbers represent, and it doesn't tell you anything about the conclusions you can draw from that axiomatic statement. And so the objectivity of it is very limited. It's limited to that certain statement. It doesn't tell you that 2 mongoose plus 2 giraffes equals 4 interesting days. You can't just apply the statement to anything. So the meaning within that statement still determines whether the statement is objectively true or not. And if those parameters aren't tightly controlled for, both epistemologically and logically, then you can come to some inaccurate conclusions that appear objective just because there's a mathematical statement involved. So in 1807, Schleiermacher, who is mentioned both by White and Ehrman, if you get into stylometric studies, this is a classic study that's always brought up. He argued that 1 Timothy contained too many hapax legomena, which are unique words. So there was 81 words and phrases found nowhere else within the Pauline epistles. And so because there's all these really unique words that are present in 1 Timothy, it's unlikely that Paul wrote that letter, according to Schleiermacher. You can think back to episode 2, where we talked about the Federalist Papers, where Hamilton used the word upon 18 times more frequently than Madison did. So if you see the word upon showing up frequently in a letter, well, then it's likely that Hamilton wrote that letter and not Madison. And that same logic is being used here by Schleiermacher. So if there are these unique words in the letter, and those words never appear in any other letter, well, then it's unlikely that the same individual wrote it because they have certain tendencies to use specific vocabulary. And this vocabulary is very different. Therefore, the author is probably different. Bart Ehrman is another noted supporter of the idea of applying stylometrics to the authenticity of the Pauline corpus debate. So here are some quotes from chapter 3 of his book, Forged, published in 2011. He says, quote, "The arguments over word usage have gotten increasingly refined over the 90 years since he wrote, and in almost every study done, it is clear that the word usages of the pastorals is different from that in Paul's other letters." So again, he's making an argument here that because the word selection is different, both in unique words and proportion of these minor filler words, that indicates authorship. The frequency of word usage is a measurement of style, and since the measurement of style is different in the pastorals from the other letters, that means the pastorals are unlikely to be written by Paul and therefore are inauthentic. He brings up another scholar, Bouchard, here, and he says Bouchard analyzed all sorts of stylistic features of Colossians, and he does a lot more than just looking at words. It's the kind and frequency of conjunctions specifically, infinitives, participles, relative clauses, strings of genitives, and scores of other things. So he's looking at more than just words. He's looking at clauses, so like words in sequence with other words, specific types of words where they would be used, and these are additional measurements of style. Now, Bouchard compared his data from Colossians to other letters that he claims are similar in length, though that's subjective to say how similar a letter needs to be exactly similar enough for comparison. He brings up Galatians, Philippians, and 1 Thessalonians, and he says that Colossians is markedly different in these measurements than those other letters of Paul. So you can kind of see here how stylometrics is being used to claim that X letter or X group of letters differs from another group of Pauline letters, and because the styles are different, that indicates different authorship. So this is kind of a short episode just to lay that idea in your mind. And I said in the last episode we're going to a literature review after this, but first I'm going to do a lengthy video on, from my perspective, issues with Pauline stylometry. I'm going to give you this from my perspective as a computer scientist, because that's what I am, a computer scientist. I have an MS, not a biblical scholar. So when we're talking about these mathematical studies, specifically computational studies that are using computers to do these things, I got interested in this subject from reading about how these mathematical models were being applied to make claims about authenticity. And so now I'm going to tell you my perspective on the issues studying Pauline stylometry, and that's going to prime you for our literature review so you can understand the objections first and then see whether the studies that are done on the Pauline corpus in the 21st century and specifically in the past 10 years, do any of those studies encounter an objection that we lay out in our issues with Pauline stylometry. And if you disagree with my objections, then that will still be in your mind when you're looking at the studies to say, well, I think that he's wrong about this, he's right about this, and etc. So that'll be the next episode.